Wow. How you doing?
I'm good. Just finished a rehearsal for my show in Bandera on Friday.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Nice. Are you playing originals or what are you doing?
Well, I mean, it's a 4-hour gig. I don't have that many originals, but
yeah. Well, but no, that's cool. But you'll play some.
Yeah, I have like an hour of originals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's cool. And it's with a full band.
Yeah, well, 3 of us, a trio.
Wow,
full enough.
Yeah, I mean, if it's good enough for Jimi Hendrix, it's good enough for you, right?
Yeah,
that's what I always say.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. So this chapter this week was difficult. I found myself doing that thing where I'd like read 3 paragraphs and realize I had no idea what I just read.
Yeah, me too.
That happened to me a lot. It took me a long time. I got through maybe the first 6 sections, and then you texted me and told me the other sections that were important. But it took me like 3 sittings just to get through those 6, and I still don't. I don't know most of the references. I guess the problem is I don't know the stuff that well. I don't really know Schopenhauer. I don't really know the story of Parsifal. I don't know that opera very well.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I mean, that's why, I put you towards the end because I feel like he sums it up very succinctly. Yep. And yeah, no, I mean, this was a difficult chapter for me too. I feel like I only hit a stride with it at the end, and I don't know why that was.
Right. Well, those sections you told me to read were really easy. I just read them.
Maybe that's it. Okay.
Fast.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was. He starts off so like
I know.
He's just referencing like crazy.
I know. Yeah, maybe that's what it is. He honestly, I feel like he is just very top heavy, and I guess this is kind of how most writers are. Is this is like when you sit down, you've got the most steam when you're writing at the very beginning.
Sure.
You know?
But then it's best at the end. It's like you should have done that at the beginning.
Exactly, because you sort of get out all the BS and you like refine the idea and strain it out.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that he sort of makes reference to, though, is how he's sort of poetical, too, and you can kind of see where Foucault gets his style from, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I agree. This was a difficult chapter. But here's my question. Are you convinced that he's not anti-Semitic yet? I mean...
I think he's even more anti-Semitic than ever.
But don't you feel a little silly? I mean, he's in here hard. Because you came out very hard against the man in the beginning.
Well, it was pretty weird that he was continually naming the Jews.
No, but I think that you fell into the trap that basically, that he set for people that, no offense, Mr. Antushka, but that people, like, because I was actually reading about more of the editor's notes about this, about how he would explicitly write in a way to be misread.
I mean,
so that
it's
people who
that's
weren't
kind of
reading,
funny.
Yes, but I'm just saying is you have explicitly said how you haven't finished any of these, right? So that's my point.
I finished the first one.
Oh, you did finish the first one. Yeah. Okay, so there goes my theory. All right. I don't know, but do you? I mean, but okay, so you disagree because I am trying to. I don't. Make a point
I think I don't. I'm a little bit confused. Okay. So I see what you mean about the trap. I think there's some kind of funny, almost irony or something, to be like to say to Hitler like, "Aha, you fell into my trap. You weren't supposed to kill all those Jews." And Hitler's like, "Oh."
It's like Hitler. You were supposed to read the third essay and not get tired.
If only
after the first one.
Well, he also in the second essay says something bad about anti-Semites too.
Right, but I'm just saying, yes, you're right, yeah. But, like, he's even more explicit in this one. He's talking about how he hates the New Testament and likes the Old one. Right. Like, he's, like, obviously not, and then, he talks more about how bad anti-Semites are and stuff like that.
I also wonder if he means something by that. Like, if he means he's using Jews as some sort of archetype, I wonder what he means by anti-Semites.
No,
he doesn't
he's
really
using
go into
Jew hater as an archetype, I would say. He's using Jew haters as an archetype, not Jew. as an archetype. So,
well, he uses Jews as an archetype in the first essay. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I
mean, he talks about the Jews a lot in that one.
Yes.
And how they have a hateful ideology that's based on vengeance.
Yes.
And that we need to give them credit because that vengeance is what brought Europe where it is, but it's not noble.
Yeah,
so I wonder who these anti-Semites are. I guess that's what I'm sort of curious as who he's referring to.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I mean his editor, like one of the book publishers that he published with, he actually left them because they were publishing a lot of anti-Semitic literature, and he left them.
So people who were against Jews in Germany or in Europe at the time.
Well, and he talks about like Christian bourgeois, like, you know, there was a certain sect of sort of enlightened Germans in his society that were, you know, smart enough to be well read about stuff, but dumb enough to sort of fall into anti-Semitic tropes, essentially. And that's the point, is like he had an editor that was one of those people, for instance.
Right.
And so, yeah, those are the types of people I think he's talking about. Is it's because he's always railing against, in a sense, of like kind of like sophistry, like you know, like like charlatanism and stuff like that too. I mean, he sort of breaks everything down, and he even breaks down philosophers in this, which I thought was really interesting because he's okay. So so we're talking about the third essay, and it's a critique, or it's on, what is that? It's about aesthetic ideals. I don't remember the exact title.
I think it is the aesthetic ideal, right?
Aesthetic. Aesthetic.
Well, it's super different.
It is very different. I'm being stupid. Aesthetic. Yeah, like asceticism or whatever, right?
Like those monks that smack themselves in the face.
Exactly.
In Monty Python.
Yes. Ascetic. How do you pronounce it? You're right, because I only ever read it.
I think that's it.
Ascetic? Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. The ascetic idea. And so he makes a really interesting point that basically what it is that it's a self-defeating.
Right.
Well, so first off, I guess I'm just trying to think of how, maybe I'll just try to put a very nice bow on it. Yeah. Fundamentally, it's the ascetic ideal is an ideal after, it's something that we humans invented to help us with the depression of life, essentially. And it allowed us to add meaning to suffering. And and I was unsure if he was saying that all things that go towards pursue the ascetic ideal are pursuing truth. But certainly the two examples that he used which are Christianity and science. And I thought that was one of the really maybe most interesting points he was making, is that Christianity and science are actually very similar from this perspective and have the same grounding, which is they have presupposition of some kind of truth, essentially.
Right.
And that they're both in pursuit of truth, and that they're also both essentially in pursuit of an ascetic ideal, it seems, is what he's saying. So anyway, and then the counter force to this, but he didn't really go into this, but I think he goes into this more in The Birth of Tragedy and the Antichrist, is art. That's the counter to the will towards the ascetic ideal, is the will to art.
Right.
Because it's sort of embracing of, I guess, human nature and whatnot, whereas the ascetic ideal is all about defeating human nature, which is why ultimately Christianity has been defeated. And I thought this was a really sort of just like a quote that really just affirms why we're still talking about Nietzsche. in at the end of section 27, as the will to truth thus gains self-consciousness, there can be no doubt of that. Morality will gradually perish now. This is the great spectacle in 100 acts reserved for the next 2 centuries in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about that too. That one left a mark on me.
Yeah, the most terrible, most questionable, and perhaps also the most hopeful of all spectacles. So yeah, I mean, he calls it, right? And so that's it, is, you know.
Good call.
Yeah, all great things bring about their own destruction through an act of self-overcoming, because that's what the pursuit of the ascetic ideal is it's like this turning inward of our human, our tendency towards power.
Right.
We turn it inwards and then we destroy ourselves. Okay, so that's me trying to put a bow on it. I'll stop talking. Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. Antushka.
Point of personal privilege.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. I like that. We should call each other Mr. more often.
Yeah.
I think that's all. That's all good. I feel like the one thing that we should address is what is ascetic. What does he mean? Because the essay is what is the meaning of ascetic ideals, and he kind of keeps re-asking this question throughout the chapter, bringing it up again. You know, like if this and this and this, then what is the meaning? Well, then the meaning is what, and then he kind of like he's got nice rhetoric surrounding it, but at least I didn't get to any part where he said like this is what ascetic means. I think that there's almost an assumption going into it that we understand or we can intuit what this ascetic ideal is. Because we're saying what is the meaning of the ascetic ideal? What even is the ascetic ideal?
I think he defines it. This is precisely what the ascetic ideal means, that something was lacking, that man was surrounded by a fearful void, but he did not know how to justify, to account for, to affirm himself.
But that's very poetic. I mean, like, I mean more of a baseline.
It's a lacking, though. And I think it's, well, okay. So, because I took it, and I can try to find, because I swear he's explicitly defined it, but I take it as it's the opposite of sort of life in a way. You're starving yourself. You're not eating. You know, it's the opposite. You're going away from impulses, essentially.
Right. And like denial, self-denial.
Yes.
Suffering.
Yes.
Self-imposed suffering.
Exactly. And that's why he says it springs up, is because men desire suffering if there's a meaning for it. He says that. You know, we're the only animal that will actually desire suffering as long as there's a meaning for it. We'll go towards suffering.
Not only that, we also see more meaning in suffering. We've talked about this before. Like the idea that medicine tastes bad seems right to us.
Right.
And actually the idea of a good tasting medicine is like, that doesn't work.
Right. And so he says this explicitly, the ascetic ideal offers man meaning.
Right.
And so you put suffering under this perspective of guilt. So that's why he says we invented it, is to help us understand the feeling of suffering that we have with existence. It's like an intellectualization of it from consciousness, because that's where again I sort of keep sorry, but that's I was just reading a quote that I'll read later, but anyway, there's a lot of great quotes in this too, and I mean
my favorite was when he was like saying that they didn't have balls, and he does it in the most poetic way ever.
Who was he talking about?
He's talking about the contemplative historians.
Yeah.
And he does this whole little thing, and it's like, is he just saying that they don't have any balls?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, but I was saying, you know, this is he's talking about consciousness, but then he's not really doing it in a very overt way, but then he will talk about it overtly sometimes, like he'll explicitly use the word unconscious. And again, this is where obviously translation is difficult. But it's also making me realize, like, he's also writing at a time where psychology was becoming a thing. It wasn't really a very well-defined specialty yet. Freud actually was influenced by Nietzsche, not the other way around, which when you look at Freud's psychology, it makes a lot of sense how you could, get a lot of the ideas of the ego and the id and the subconscious from what Nietzsche's talking about. And that's exactly what I keep saying I want to do. Freud, I feel like, essentially did also. It was like, you could be like, well, Nietzsche's talking about this very abstractly. We can be more defined about everything. What is ascetic ideal? Why don't you just come out and say it? Right? Did you find the quote? Sorry, as I was...
Oh, sorry. I stopped.
Oh, you didn't have
I didn't
to
think it was that important.
No, you don't have to. It's fine. I mean... yeah, well, and I thought it was interesting because as we talk about defining ascetic ideal, he also had, I think, a more explicit definition of good conscience or bad conscience in this also, which is funny because that was the one sort of definition we were struggling with last episode. And I thought he summed it up well to mean just sin. And as in, it's just like, it's bad conscience is anything that we sort of would put under the definition of sin.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So
but sin, I like things that go against God or something like that.
Well, cruelty directed backwards is what they say.
Like asceticism.
Yes.
So is asceticism a form of sin?
I don't know. I think I'm getting us mixed up. It was only in the hands of the priest that artist in guilt feelings that had achieved form. Oh, what a form, sin. For this is the priestly name for the animal's bad conscience. Cruelty directed backward has been the greatest event so far in the history and the sick soul. We possess in it the most dangerous and fateful artifice of religious interpretation. So that's why I'm just taking it more to mean, like, again, it's, trying to find explicit definitions here is difficult, but that was one where I felt like he was doing it.
I feel like the first half of that, I feel like I have this thing with him a lot. The first half of that, I get, and I think I understand and kind of agree with to a point, sort of see where he's going with it, about the idea of the priest's description of the animal soul. So, being more animalistic and less human, less free, less willful, as quote, God has called us to be, is sin. Acting like an animal is sin because we are meant to act with will and volition, and animals act off instinct. And so I can see how that's the separation from God. But it's the second part that's confusing to me because what was it? Something acting back on itself?
Cruelty directed backwards. I think he's just saying that we look at it as sin. That's our cruelty.
But the funny thing is that sounds like asceticism.
No, I know, but this is what I think what he's saying is that when we look at these impulses as sin, yes, that is asceticism. That is what he's saying. Yes.
But the priests love asceticism.
No,
they're like all about it.
Yes, no, but he is saying that, though. Yes, exactly, because he's talking about the priest. He's saying this is what the priest is telling them to do. He's bringing the bad conscience into light.
He's telling them to sin.
He's giving definition to it.
Okay.
They don't have a conception of it as good or bad until it's told to them by the priest.
Okay.
That's the point. And that is why, you're right, it is the same as asceticism, because that's what he's saying, is Christianity is reaching for the ascetic ideal.
Right.
So you're right. Yes, good. You sniffed it out.
Did I? I'm still confused. Dude, it's over my head. That's the sense I got reading this. Like, it's too much for me.
It's a lot, yes. But no, here's what I thought was very interesting is he sort of lays out 4 sort of treatment, because this is the thing, is at the end, that's why I said read the last one. I think he really wraps it up. The ultimate reason for the ascetic ideal being created is
to create meaning.
Is to create meaning for the suffering, to help people understand their lot, because we need to. So he was saying, and he keeps talking about the ascetic priest, because it's the ascetic priest is the person that formed all this, right? And they had 4 sort of measures of helping people treat depression, essentially. One is you turn off the mind, and so this is where he's talking about the like the monks in Buddhism and stuff. And then 2 is he calls petty pleasures, which are like, examples like doing good things for your neighbors and stuff like that. And then 3 would be formations of the herd or congregations, like making groups. And then 4 is what he terms orgy of feeling, which is basically this formation of guilt, this defining impulses as sin and ascribing a guilty feeling to when you do them. To put like a bin.
Well, because it has to infiltrate every area. Because like being out in the cold and suffering for no reason seems really stupid and crappy. But also it has to be, if you're happy about something, you got to insert a little asceticism into that, and into your sexual desire, and into everything. It has to be everywhere, because that's the source of meaning. So you can't give in to hedonism or happiness or joy or instinct or anything like that. That's my understanding of it. It's not just giving meaning to suffering that already exists. It's also injecting suffering into other areas in order to give those meaning too, in order to derive meaning through suffering.
I think so, yeah. I would agree with that.
Which is his whole thing about why it's ultimately also nihilistic.
Yes. Well, and it's self-hating, yes. But is deriving meaning from it, yes. And that's, I think, maybe one thing he hasn't really talked about is this will for meaning, I guess you could say. Where does that come from? And I guess that's where I would say that I think the fact that he doesn't discuss it, maybe that's getting at some of my issues with it, whereas I feel like even while he feels like everybody else is discussing things superficially, of course, then the later generation comes in and says, I feel like you're discussing things not completely deep enough, and is maybe not discussing meaning because then you have to discuss consciousness more directly. I don't know.
I also don't know.
It also could be that, he does go crazy 2 years after this is published and is in an insane asylum for the rest of his life.
Or maybe he went crazy. That's just what his enemies say.
Exactly, yeah. Well, he was in an asylum either way.
What would Foucault have to say about that?
Well, we know what we read what he had to say. I mean, it is a good question, is what would they have done with the likes of Nietzsche? Well, first off, the likes of Nietzsche wouldn't have been able to write what he's writing in the Middle Ages. So that's why it's like there's pros and cons to all of this. It's like the artist that is Nietzsche would have existed, but he would have probably been writing about everything in obscurity, because there was no way it could have reached circulation during Middle Age time.
That Middle Age time.
Yeah.
All right, so I have a few notes I made that were a little bit more specific.
Yeah.
Kind of bumps along the way.
Sure.
I said, look up Parsifal to learn more about it.
Yeah. Did you do that?
Okay, so separation of art and artist. That was a little interesting section that he was talking about how you have to separate the art from the artist, and almost completely, in order to truly appreciate a work of art, is to not consider the artist at all while consuming it, and just consider the art as itself.
I missed this part.
And he even talks about how the art has to have no meaning other than itself, which is crazy because that, to me, that's like the 20th century argument. That's the whole thing when the music school, the programmatic music versus absolute music argument.
I'm not familiar. I don't.
We had to write an essay on it.
Dude, I mean, are you sure I was in that class?
I'm positive.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, because we had to write, it was Brahms versus Wagner.
Yeah.
It was definitely on the final for second semester music history. But
wait. Oh, second semester music history. Okay,
yep.
Yeah. It rings a bell, but anyway, it's been
it's just interesting because of how much he's writing about Wagner.
Yeah.
Because Wagner's Mr. Programmatic Music. Wagner's writing operas that are about things. Mm-hmm. And he's using Parsifal and Die Meistersinger, two of Wagner's operas, which aren't called operas. What are they called? Music dramas or something like that. Which are sort of programmatic. They're about things. And then he's talking about how to consume a piece of art, what you have to do is to not think about the artist at all and not think about actually anything other than the art itself, without meaning other than itself, which is ultimately the absolute music argument, that music has no meaning intrinsically. Like, what does a major scale mean? Nothing. It's just a major scale. Like a C major chord has no meaning, and what you can do is you can play with sounds to give it contextual meaning.
Yeah, no, I mean that's an interesting point that you make because he's essentially opening this with a slight against Wagner, right? Saying how Wagner, basically saying like Wagner's old music was great, but now he's become a Christian and his music sucks.
Yeah,
because that was what I took away from that whole part. This is very interesting to hear your interpretation because I think I would agree with that. It's to say he probably is a music absolutist.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe even Wagner was in his younger ages too. Because that's sort of a thing I also keep meaning to read about more is what their relationship was. Because I'm pretty sure Nietzsche knew Wagner. We talked about this, but I didn't look into it. But yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point. I would agree with that. He's Nietzsche's an absolutist. So are you what are you?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I agree with the idea that a C major chord doesn't mean anything. And I think it's given meaning through the context of other sounds.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of what we were talking about. Was this on the podcast about frequencies? Or was this just a conversation we had? I don't even remember.
Maybe just a conversation we had. When we were talking about music frequencies, I feel like we were just talking on the phone then.
Oh, okay. Yeah, probably. Anyway, yeah, I don't think any musical entity has any meaning by itself. But I think I don't know. I'm not against programmatic music. I think it's silly to say that it's wrong to write a song about something. But I think it's very interesting to treat pieces of art as discrete unto themselves. So
did you get the impression that that's what his big issue with Wagner was? Because I didn't get that impression.
No, I don't think that was his big issue with Wagner.
Oh, okay.
It was this whole thing. It was all sort of confusing because he moves from Wagner to Schopenhauer, and it's just like this mess of stuff, and Kant, and it's like, what's happening here?
Yes.
And the problem is I don't know any of their bodies of work well enough to follow him very easily.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Like, I think if I knew Wagner's body of work and Schopenhauer and Kant, I probably would have an easier time getting through it.
Right. Yeah, I got the impression it was like Wagner was at the stage. He was living out the ascetic ideal, and he was at the stage of defeating himself. He was once a great artist, and now he's sort of become a Christian, and his now turning inward onto himself, and his work is reflective of that.
Well, maybe it's that, because he talks about how the artist can't actually, or can't and probably then shouldn't try and put themselves into the work. Homer isn't Achilles. He talks about that, and how Homer couldn't have written the Odyssey if he were Achilles.
Oh, yes. That was actually, a very interesting point. Yes, how and even like what did he make? He made a point about
I can read it. Yeah. One should guard against confusion through psychological contiguity, to use a British term. A confusion to which an artist himself is only too prone, as if he himself were what he is able to represent, conceive, and express. The fact is that if he were it, he would not represent, conceive, and express it. A Homer would not have created an Achilles, nor Goethe a Faust, if Homer had been Achilles, or if Goethe a Faust. Whoever is completely and wholly an artist is to all eternity separated from the real, the actual. On the other hand, one can understand how he may sometimes weary to the point of desperation of the eternal unreality and falsity of his innermost existence.
See, I think that's getting at how art is the opposition to the aesthetic ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like the aesthetic ideal is, I'm becoming more confident, is one with pursuit of truth, which is sort of like a pursuit of reality almost.
Right.
And art it's just the opposite of all of that.
Right. But then he starts to kind of pat philosophers on the back, because he says a genuine philosopher pays homage to the aesthetic ideal. And then he talks about philosophers who aren't genuine philosophers.
Yeah, I don't think he's patting him on the back, though, because I think he actually is very, almost, he sort of breaks everybody down, philosophers included.
Mm-hmm.
A philosopher may be recognized by the fact that he avoids 3 glittering and loud things: fame, princes, and women.
Nice. Yeah, so he's moved from Jews to women. There's definitely a little bit of he's got an issue with women in this chapter.
Yeah, well, Miss Anne.
He keeps coming back to it.
Yeah,
calls them demons, devils.
Again, I think he's being a troll. I don't think he's saying that.
Right.
No, I mean, I don't think he's saying that. I don't know. I don't remember where that is, but I'm sure if you read it.
I mean, I think it has to do with like the allure and asceticism and I mean, I don't know if he's being a troll, but he's being a little cheeky, because he's saying one of the values of asceticism is to, resist the temptation of the devils that are women.
Right, which I think he means more to be just lust,
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think where I would say is it's coming from a very male perspective.
Right.
Like,
yes,
female philosophers probably don't have to spend a whole lot of time resisting women unless they're gay. But
I don't know. I actually have underlined ascetic ideal definition, so let's see if this holds up. So this is at the beginning of 13. The ascetic ideal springs from the protective instinct of a degenerating life, which tries by all means to sustain itself and to fight for its existence. It indicates a partial physiological obstruction and exhaustion against which the deepest instincts of life, which have remained intact, continually struggle with new expedients and devices. So, ideal springs from the protective instinct of a degenerating life. It's the idea that we have this feeling like we're dying all the time, and then we make up this reason for why we feel that way. And I think this feeling that we're dying all the time comes from society, which is what he sort of was getting at in, I think, the first book essay we talk about how, it's like this thing of resentment sprung up when walls came up and we put the human into society and started to tame them and tell them all that their impulses are bad and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, I'm not, I think part of the reason why it's so difficult to understand is because it is paradoxical in a sense. He keeps talking about a fundamental will to power that all life has.
Uh-huh.
And I think the ascetic ideal is turning this will to power in on itself.
So a will to power against the will to power.
Yes, as a means of building the will to power up.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so confusing, because that's the point. It's like this destructive ideal was made to help actually people survive, and in particular the sick people of society, because it's like there's a subset of people in society who are the aesthetic priests who don't need this, that they don't want to be part of the herd. And this is where, again, the people would probably read like Hitler and get all their sort of opinions, but not us.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure. Yeah. Not us.
Yeah.
Not us.
But yeah.
Yeah. One more thing that I thought was an interesting point kind of on this, the kind of art topic. Okay, so... Okay, in such a case as this, embarrassing in many ways, my view is, I think he's talking about Christianity and Parsifal. And it is a typical case that one does best to separate an artist from his work, not taking him as seriously as his work. He is, after all, only the precondition of his work, the womb, the soil, sometimes the the dung and manure out of which it grows, and therefore, in most cases, something one must forget if one too is enjoy the work itself. Insight into the origin of a work concerns the physiologists and vivisectionists of the spirit, never the aesthetic man and never the artist! Exclamation point.
Right.
And then further down, he has an interesting analogy. The poet and creator of Parsifal could no more be spared a deep, thorough, and even frightful identification with and descent into medieval soul conflicts, a hostile separation from all spiritual height, severity, and discipline, a kind of intellectual perversity, if I may be pardoned the word. Then can a pregnant woman be spared the repellent and bizarre aspects of pregnancy, which, as aforesaid, must be forgotten if one is to enjoy the child?
Yeah, the first quote that you read, there's a lot there. I was understanding it until the end. Can you read the last sentence again?
The first part? Yeah, the last part's a little bit confused. The last sentence is a little bit confusing.
Because I wouldn't put the aesthetic man and the artist in the same category. So I want to make sure I was hearing that correctly. He said the artist and aesthetic
so insight into the origin of a work concerns the physiologists and vivisectionists of the spirit, never the aesthetic man, the artist. I think when I hear aesthetic man, maybe it's a technical term of Nietzsche's. I am imagining like the physical man that you can perceive. Wagner, what you should be doing is talking about Parsifal, the opera, and not really even thinking about Wagner.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Which it's interesting because actually that's a very modern debate. That's something that we talk about all the time.
What?
Separating the art from the artist.
No, yes, very much so. And also what's like how much does the artist, especially in the case of music, how much does the artist's opinion about how their piece was supposed to be played actually matter.
Well, this is the thing: is he seems to be separating it to a high degree, that the art isn't the artist really in any way other than the artist was sort of the ground that the art grew out of. But it's a whole new thing.
Yeah. I think I would agree. I think that is kind of what he's saying.
Yeah. What do you think?
What do you think?
What do I think? I don't know. I go back and forth on that all the time. I think that it's tricky because we deal with so many things today that aren't really what I would call art. So I think there's the world of sort of propaganda, and I don't remember what his name is. He's from the Weird Science podcast. He calls it artifice. There's artifice and there's art. And artifice is stuff like ads, stuff like government propaganda, stuff like pornography, things that are designed to make you want or feel or act in certain ways. And then art is not that. Art is something that is created not to, get you to go out and buy a hamburger.
Yeah, it's supposed to probably enliven higher ideals.
Maybe, something like that.
Something like that, right?
Because if we're talking about artifice, you can't really separate the person who created it because they have specifically injected some idea into it on purpose to get you to feel a certain way or do a certain thing.
Yeah. I mean, I get a sense that he's saying the aesthetic ideal is really just like hyper intellectualization.
Right.
And then the opposite of that is art, which is like it's the not thinking about it and just sort of like letting it come out of you in whatever form, which is why you don't want to study the human that made it in a logical sense. You just want to sort of experience the art and not think about it.
I mean, that also sounds right with the artifice thing. Because artifice is a little bit higher minded. You have to be more intellectual to properly get somebody to go out and buy a hamburger. If you're just feeling a hamburger and start drawing it, it might come out like anything.
Well, I just think we're talking maybe about two slightly different things. I'm wondering.
Maybe. Well, because he talks about I had the word in my head before, the historians he doesn't like.
Oh, the contemplative?
The contemplatives. They're highly intellectual.
Yeah, and he's making a critique of them, I would say.
But they also bring feeling into it or something. I don't really know. When I was reading that, I wanted to know who he was talking about. Like, is there a specific school of thought or specific people?
So I'm saying, what am I saying? I'm just saying that you have opposite to art, you have the aesthetic ideal. That's what he said.
I think that's right.
And it seems like the aesthetic ideal, as we've said, is self-defeating. It's an inward will of power. It's sort of destroying you. It's turning against your impulses. And I've also now sort of added, in my opinion, it's also sort of maybe a hyper-rationalization. It's like it's also, because I guess that's what pulling your impulses in is it's the consciousness that's pulling the impulses in. Sorry, I'm just closing my eyes because I'm realizing it helps me think a lot more. I see smart people do this all the time.
They close their eyes?
I'm like, oh, it makes a lot of sense because that's when I feel like I lose my train of thought, is when I'm like looking at the Zoom screen and I see both of us. And anyway, as I say that and I lose my train of thought. So, but I'm just saying that art is the opposite of that, right? And I guess, so what are you saying that this artifice.
I was just saying that artifice, it was just a thought that I was relating it to this other thing that I was listening to. And artifice feels like it's closer to Nietzsche's ascetic principle.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. Anyway, it wasn't that important a point.
I feel like we do that a lot.
Do what?
I'll be like, wait, so I'll go on a long thing of like, what are you saying? I'll go on a long question, and then I'll end it with basically like, so what are you saying exactly? And you're like, oh, it's just this. I'm like, oh, that's all it is? Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
Yeah. All right, the contemplatives. Because the other thing that was interesting in that contemplative section is he's talking about one set of historians who are highly ascetic. And he seems to be like jabbing them a little bit. The ones who remove themselves entirely from history and don't have any judgment. It's just about pure description.
Yeah, the French, right? It was the French.
So he seems to be jabbing at them a little bit, but he's saying like they are really like very ascetic. So like maybe that's good. And then he's got these next people who he hates. He really doesn't like them. And I want to know who he's talking about.
Which section
the
are you talking about?
Contemplatives, 26. So 26. The second paragraph. As for that other type of historian, an even more, quote, modern type, perhaps. Hedonist and voluptuary.
Oh.
Who flirts with both life and with the ascetic ideal.
Yeah, yes, you're right. The historical nihilists.
I feel like that's me.
Yeah. Well, that would make sense because I feel like we're seeing a renaissance of everything Nietzsche was talking about in Germany. I think we're seeing the same sort of stuff now.
Nice. And so, I was actually wondering what we're doing, like what this podcast is. Is this ascetic or are we just being hedonistic, essentially?
I think it's an expedition. That's what I say.
An expedition.
Yes. It's an intellectual expedition.
Right.
So I guess it's ascetic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah. But it's a little artistic too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you see that artwork that we have, you know?
Yeah, right. Nobody else does.
No. They wouldn't know if they did.
Yeah.
So I mean, because he talks about this guy Renan, specifically Ernst Renan, as like an example of one of the historians that he doesn't like, a prolific French scholar and writer. Remembered chiefly for his immensely successful Life of Jesus, published in June 1863. This is just a footnote in my edition.
Nice.
But this was a particularly popular historian of the time, and he is sort of, I think you're right, sort of talking badly about these kind of salon historians.
Right. See, this is what I'm saying. We feel like worse than salon historians to me.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, because we're objective armchair scholars.
I mean, come on, we're super duper armchair scholars.
Hey, speak for yourself, buddy. No, but I mean, seriously, in a way, I mean, in a sense, I am trying to get my whatever you could say, bona fide
in history.
Well, in philosophy.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
See what I did there?
I do. I see exactly what you did.
Yeah, which I would say this is more of a philosophy podcast. In fact, that is what I put the definition as when I made it.
Okay.
Let the record stand. This is a philosophy podcast, dang it. Count Sarnett. For anybody suing us in the future, trying to say that we're, I don't know, like a news show or something.
Yeah, a news show? That would be crazy.
You never know.
Breaking. Has anybody heard what Nietzsche said? It's like you've only had
back in 1887.
About 160 years to figure it out.
Yeah, that's right.
140. Yeah.
Cool. You looked like you were about to say something. I should look. You're doing much more dutiful.
I'm
going
just
over your
because
notes.
I didn't get as much of the reading done, so I had to take notes to figure out what I was going to talk about. The other thing that was interesting to me was his bit about beauty. So that's when he brings Kant into the whole issue. And there were some interesting propositions for what beauty is, but the idea of appreciation without interest, which I think he's saying is not exactly capturing it correctly. But that's just a crazy idea to me, to appreciate something without interest. And the example he uses is, appreciating a nude statue without getting sexually aroused or something like that. Well, I mean, I understand that. That makes sense to me, but it's a weird use of the word interest.
Does it, Antushka?
Yeah. No, also, you should never take me to any clothing store. Those mannequins, they just get me. I'm not aroused.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like you have honed in on this idea of connection between, like, I guess, a thing and the creator. I don't know. I feel like it's more of what you're getting at, isn't it? I don't know.
Well, this is the next section after that when he's talking about beauty and the idea of a spectator. I think it's related. I think it follows. But when he's talking about needing a spectator in order to have a concept of beauty and the argument, because I think he's saying that Kant gets it wrong, and he goes back to Pat Schopenhauer in the back a little bit more. I don't know, it's just very confusing to me, the idea of beauty without a spectator.
Yeah. I guess I hadn't thought about it.
Because that is beautiful, said Kant, which gives us pleasure without interest. Compare this definition, one framed by a genuine spectator and artist, Stendhal, who once called the beautiful the une promesse de bonheur. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but probably I'm not sure. At any rate, he rejected and repudiated the one point about the aesthetic condition which Kant had stressed, the disinteressement. So, like the disinterest.
Yeah, can you keep reading? Because I think we're reading out of context right now. Or can you tell me where you are? That would be the other option.
6. If our aestheticians never weary of asserting in Kant's favor that, under the spell of beauty, one can even view undraped female statues, quote, without interest, one may laugh a little at their expense. The experiences of artists on this ticklish point are more interesting. And Pygmalion was in any event not necessarily an unaesthetic man, which is interesting. Let us think the more highly of the innocence of our aestheticians, which is reflected in such arguments. Let us, for example, credit it to the honor of Kant that he should
expatiate.
Expatiate. What does that mean? I don't know. On the particular properties of the sense of touch with peculiar the naivety of a country person.
Well, it's take it out and then patiate. It's to, like take something from something.
Yeah.
And then
similar to extrapolate, perhaps?
Probably.
Patiate.
Yeah, to like expound, probably elaborate in some way.
Something like that. Yeah.
On a peculiar properties of the sense of touch.
So I think he's saying that Kant is wrong, but in a sort of charming way.
Yes, because I think he's ultimately sides with Hume. Because I think this is what I'm getting at, is I think what he's getting at when he's talking about all of this, and that's why I was sort of pointing out that idea of like a spectator and stuff like that. So I think he's getting at the connection thing again of moments. He's getting at the reality, the idea that there's an assumption between the connection between our sensation of the world and whether there's an actual world that exists.
Right.
And I think that's what he's getting at in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what Kant was getting at in his Critique of Pure Reason. And I think Kant, he's saying is naive because I think Kant thinks that there is a connection between our sense of the world and the real world. Whereas I feel like Nietzsche doesn't think that there is one.
Huh.
But I don't know. I could be misreading this. Yeah.
I mean, this took me many times to read through this. This is why I didn't get very far, as I got stuck many times.
Mm-hmm.
And here we come back to Schopenhauer, who stood much closer to the arts than Kant, and yet did not free himself from the spell of the Kantian definition. How did that happen? The circumstance is remarkable enough. He interpreted the term without interest in an extremely personal way, on the basis of one of his most regular experiences.
Well, yeah, but that was all just introduction to get us to start talking about his actual point. That's also the problem, of course, with Nietzsche, is he is very long-winded. And I feel like he gets to his main points at the end of sections.
Sure.
Which I guess is what most people do. But
well, at the end of the section, Schopenhauer emphasizes another effect of the beautiful. The beautiful promises happiness. To him, the fact seems to be precisely that the beautiful arouses the will, interestedness. So this is exactly what he's saying. He's saying that Kant is exactly wrong, that it's not pleasure without interest. It's that beauty is the arousal of interest in the first place.
I don't think he's saying that he's wrong. I think he's just saying, look, Schopenhauer has another way of looking at it. Because I think he then goes on to say how Schopenhauer, look at Schopenhauer's perspective. This is the perspective of a horny 26-year-old, basically.
Right.
I mean, he goes on to say that. So that's why I feel like... Yeah, because then he goes on for a long time and talks about chastity, which then goes, more into the ascetic idea, because chastity is an aesthetic ideal, right? And which goes on to more of what we were talking about, as it's this, you're saying no to an impulse.
Right.
I had a sort of a point that I had sort of starred because it's, I think, maybe one of the big conclusions of the whole 3-essay series at the end of section 24. Says the will to truth requires a critique. Let us thus define our own task. The value of truth must for once be experimentally called into question. And that's, I think, really
that's interesting.
That's what he said. That's what this whole thing is about.
The value of truth has to be called into question.
Yes.
Whoa.
Be experimentally called into question.
Yeah, let's not go crazy.
Right. Well, and yeah, he says, whoever feels that this has been stated too briefly should read the section of the Gay Science entitled "To What Extent We Too Are Still Pious."
Right.
Or preferably, Anyway. So, but I emphasize that because I think, I think that is a lot of what he's saying, which is why I was saying when you were bringing up Kant and Schopenhauer, I don't feel like he's saying either one of them are necessarily right. While I do think he's more in line with Schopenhauer's thinking, I don't think he's holding any of them up necessarily. I think he's sort of tearing everybody down and saying that it's all been at this. I mean, Kant especially had this idea of that there was a truth, and Nietzsche's saying, like, why don't we even just look at the assumption that there is a truth? And then I think this is what he's saying. Right. Art is maybe doing that.
I mean, what I just heard you say there was maybe even crazier to me, because the statement that there might not be a truth is a pretty reasonable statement to me. Mm-hmm. which is sort of a funny thing to say, but the statement that we need to question the value of truth is a much more radical statement to me. That maybe truth is not all it's cracked up to be.
Right. And that's really what he's saying. I mean, that's why, yeah. Right. So you're right. I was even getting off a little bit if you were interpreting it as the other. Yeah, because he's talking about the value of truth. Yeah. Yeah, because again, that is the ultimate assumption that science and Christianity and maybe religion more generally sit truth upon, is they value some type of truth, whether it's a truth of God or a truth of the universe.
Right.
And that's why I thought this was really interesting because, yeah, you're right. I mean, in a sense, we are these salon philosophers or writers or whatever, these contemplative writers. We're non-contemplative, though. But you're right, because I was thinking about how when he's talking about this, it's no wonder that you and I have had this discussion of like, don't you think science and Christianity both have some fundamental assumptions? Mm-hmm. One being you either assume there's a God or you assume that there's, I guess, a reality in
right. You assume that there are answers to be found.
Yes, and those are sort of one of the same. And this is what Nietzsche's saying is, yes, they are one of the same. It's a truth. Mm-hmm. I thought this was a very nice, being like, yeah, you idiots. Of course they're idiots. The same. Yeah, and he figured this out over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And sorry, I didn't mean to chastise you in the beginning about misreading him. But I was just a little sensitive about it because also my brother was texting me about it. It's like everybody I feel like...
Oh, you mean the Jews thing?
Well, yes. Well, yes, exactly.
So here's the thing. When you say misreading him, I think he wrote Jews that much on purpose.
Yes.
I don't think it was being accidental.
No, but you read it as if he was saying like, "Oh, look at these horrible people that did this thing that now we should like go and exterminate them."
So
that's what you were saying.
I guess. So after reading all of this, I still read it as very pointed at the Jews. Like I can see that he doesn't like anti-Semites also, but
pointed in what sense? What do you mean pointed? I guess.
He picks the Jews on purpose. He calls them by name. Mm-hmm. And in his examples of things that are like bad ways of developing morality, he uses things like, he names the Sabbath specifically. So specific Jewish practices.
Yeah, but he's not saying that they're bad things and that they should be exterminated from society and stuff.
Well,
like
I don't think. Yeah, I don't think I ever read that he said they should be exterminated.
Well, no, but when I said that, in the episode that we were talking about this, I had said that people misread this to say that he's anti-Semitic, and also that a lot of people think that he was a proto-Nazi.
Right. And I think I remember saying, I don't think he's a proto-Nazi, but I do think he's anti-Semitic. I think that's what I said.
Okay. And I don't think he's either.
Right.
But I can see how a Nazi would read this, rather misread this.
Yeah.
And that's my point.
I don't think that he was directing anybody to kill anybody, by the way.
Right, exactly. And nor was he saying that these people are bad. I think that's also...
No, he said they're impotent. He said they're weak. He said they're conniving.
Yeah, but I mean, those are
resentful.
Well, but again, he's talking about a resentful feeling.
No. I remember because actually my thought when I finished it, I don't remember if I said this on the podcast or not. I almost imagine that if you'd asked him, "Are you a Jew?" according to his own chapter, he might say yes.
Well, yeah, and this is why also that's the point is he's not talking about only as if Jewish people are the only ones that have these traits. Well, it's like it's a trait, it's a human trait that you can see emphasized by Jewish people in one setting, you can see emphasized by English people, and in another setting,
well, because he was also subsuming Christians in Jews.
Exactly,
because he was counting Christians as Jews in that chapter.
and he's big issue is with the New Testament, which he explicitly talks about in this essay, about how it's actually more Hellenic than Judaic in anything in its creations too.
Which is interesting, because that to me, I would like to ask him, because that to me feels like kind of a contradiction of what he was saying in the first chapter.
Yeah, a little bit, but I think what he was saying is more of that. I think I got the impression he was talking more about, it's just, you can tell it was a new writing of the time, whereas the Old Testament, you could tell, was a very old scripture that had been handed down and whittled over ages, and whereas the New Testament was thrown together, which it was. I mean, it was just like kind of thrown together, and wasn't that old. It wasn't like it had been passed. A lot of these writings and Gospels had been passed down for ages, like the Old Testament had. Right. That's how I read it, but I do see the contradiction that you're talking about.
But maybe not. I mean, also, I wonder what he means Hellenic, because my reading of his description of Jesus and the story of Jesus is like the ultimate, the ultimately devious story to enact vengeance morality. Because it enacts vengeance morality under the guise of forgiveness and kindness and nonviolence.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought he meant just Greek and ancient ways by Hellenic.
Right. Not like a tricky Trojan horse that's a trick to kill all the...
No. I mean, maybe. I don't know. I mean, and then again, and who knows what the actual definition or actual word that he used in the German translation was.
So I agree with you. I think that to read him as you must exterminate any group of people is to misread him, for sure.
Well, and also I have this problem, and what I was going to say before was... when I tell people that we're reading Nietzsche, and then people are like, "Oh, be careful," and stuff like this, and like people just have this initial
like you might start exterminating people,
like exactly, like you're gonna misread it and become Hitler, basically. Yes, dumb. Exactly. I agree, but I will admit that I felt like you had a little bit of that at the beginning.
I never thought that you were about to become Hitler.
No, not me or not us, but like that. Maybe you had some of those feelings like, oh, this is the guy that like Hitler read to become Hitler. I don't know. Are you disarmed of any of that?
I think to read it and start exterminating people is misreading it. And I think, wait a minute. And I think that after reading the second and third chapter, I am disarmed a bit. I don't think that he's as directly anti-Semitic as I thought he was after the first chapter. I agree. So my view on him has changed slightly.
Okay, thank you.
I do think that him calling out the Jews specifically is intentional.
Well, it's intentional because he's talking about the origin of the ascetic ideal in the West, which, I guess he is saying, in some sense, has origin with the Jews, but I don't think it's inevitably with them, because I think it's also, it originates in Europeans as well. It's just the Jews have a part to play. You know what I mean?
Well, the Jews are sort of the progenitors of vengeance morality in the West.
In the West, yes. But he makes a point, again, and this is the point I keep saying, to say that this is not something exclusive to Jewish people. It is in all of us.
Yes.
It is, it's, and this is where, actually, this is something that I guess we should have made a point of, because I think this is another very important thing that people took from this specific work of Nietzsche's, was his definition of resentment as being like this thing that can fester in people. And I think that was also sort of the reason that he brought it up, is because it was like, and this is why I was saying it's like, yes, he's using all these words like conniving and stuff like that, but again, look at it in context. It's like the Romans had come to Judea and taken over, an autonomous people. So they were pissed off, obviously, that they had been.
But he also it's more than they're pissed off. They were conquered, and they were, according to Nietzsche, and I mean, I guess it's probably true. They were too weak to regain their sovereignty through force. So they had to do it through other means.
Right. And again, I think this is anthropomorphizing, as funny as it sounds a little bit, is like, I don't think there was probably as much thought about it as although I guess, I mean, this is kind of what Reza Aslan's point in his Zealot book is that, Jesus, there were a ton of Messianic people at that time because it was in response to the Roman occupation. You had a lot of Messianic people come up to say that they were going to basically free their tribe.
But the Jewish vengeance story goes back way further than that. It's way pre-Rome.
You're doing the just tell me.
Oh, sorry, it's Egypt, right? Their vengeance story starts with their exodus from Egypt.
Sure, but I mean, the point remains is that he's getting at the idea that oppression of people brings a resentment phenotype out of them, regardless of if they're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or whatever. This is a human fact, and it was just emblemized in Christianity, and the reason that it ultimately has toppled is because it is this ascetic ideal that eats itself, basically, and we're seeing, and this is why I keep saying that he's not necessarily saying this is good or bad. He's just saying, let's look at this objectively, people.
Is the ascetic ideal vengeance morality of the self?
Yes, I think kind of, yeah.
Because I got the sense, and maybe I'm wrong. So the reason I'm thinking maybe I'm wrong is when we were just talking about Kant and Schopenhauer. And I was reading it like he was saying Kant was wrong and Schopenhauer was right. Or that's a simplified version, but he was kind of like tearing Kant down a little bit and boosting Schopenhauer up a little bit. I think he was to a point. But I see what you're saying about he comes to a point where he's saying kind of everybody's sort of wrong and that he's just sort of laying out what different people think and how it's sort of interesting that there's this sort of web of different thoughts that are interacting in different ways. And so then a different reading of that first chapter could be there's nobility morality and there's vengeance morality, and one or the other isn't necessarily right, but they interact with each other in different ways.
Yeah, they're sort of, I've been thinking of the way he's describing them as sort of two sides of the same axis.
Which would make him like those historians that he loves so much, that don't have any interest or valuation. They just state the facts, ma'am.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I guess I don't know if that's what his critique of them is.
Of who?
Is if of the contemplative historians that
no, not the contemplatives, the other
whatever ones. Is that his sole critique of them, that they just state the facts?
No, he liked that.
He did like that. Oh, well, then that makes sense. So what are you saying? I'm sorry.
I'm saying that makes sense. He's not.
Oh,
so
okay.
the idea that he's actually not judging, he's just stating the facts.
Right.
These people just are impotent.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, this is the thing, though, is I think, saying that is that, like, we just need to have, he uses these terms a lot, these terms of, like, diagnosis and sickness and stuff.
Right.
So I do think he thinks of it in this term of, like, we need to have a cold, hard, objective look, which is funny to say because, it does sound like he's sort of constantly saying almost the opposite. But I think it's more of that he thinks fundamentally in terms of dialectic. I think that's one main thing to frame. Right. And that he's always, I think when I read him, he's always thinking,
like these two things. Yeah.
Exactly. He's always thinking in terms of forces and counter forces.
Right.
And so, so that's why I think, when you talk about whatever.
Thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Exactly. Yes. Hypothesis, as you might say, or hippopotamus.
Right. That hypothesis.
Yeah. Cool. Well, is your head hurt after all that Nietzsche?
I just feel like I did a bad job on this one.
Well, you didn't do a bad job.
A little bit.
No, I was just saying it's just a matter, I think, of getting through them is the difficulty.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I will say that these essays were a little bit longer than probably the average chapter. Because, I mean, this last essay was like 70 pages.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's understandable that you didn't get through them all. And yeah, I mean, he's tough. I don't know. I guess the reason I just kept wanting to harp back on that, though, was, because one is like, aside from you, is just having gotten from other people this sort of, I would say,
well, I was never upset with you about it.
No, it wasn't you. It's just, but it is this idea of like that you're gonna read them and then like you're gonna turn into a Nazi.
I was pretty close.
Yeah, well, I know, and I had to pull you from the edge. No, but I mean, but yeah, okay. But I'm glad we got all that ironed out.
Right.
And we agree that he's just a complicated man.
He's super anti-Semitic and writing a playbook for Nazis.
No, I was saying we agree that he's a complicated man that nobody understands him but his woman.
But his woman?
Shaft.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we're off to anarchy next
episode. We're off to anarchy. Okay. So you don't have the book yet, right?
No. I just ordered it today.
So let's just go through the book. So it starts with a nice introduction that's not very long. None of the chapters in this one are very long, so I feel like we should do kind of handfuls, maybe.
Okay.
But it just goes through different people. So it's kind of a series of short biographies. So it's got William Goldwyn, Max Steimer. Who would be fun ones to talk about? Leo Tolstoy, that could be a fun one.
Oh, yeah.
Voltaire.
He was an anarchist?
I guess so, yeah.
Huh.
Emma Goldman, Murray Rothbard, that'd be a good one. David Friedman. And then Michael Malice ends the book with his own.
He ends it with himself. Yeah. Well, Voltaire and Tolstoy were two, and Rothbard were sort of two. And Murray Goldwyn, who was that?
Emma Goldman.
Emma Goldman sounded.
It's a good story.
You bring her up a lot too.
She was a like an American Marxist, and then she ended up going to I think she was American. I could be wrong. We should read it. We'll know when we read it. But she ends up going to the Soviet Union and having a crazy experience. But yeah, so we could do the intro, which is only a few pages. Tolstoy and Voltaire. Kind of do the older folks next time.
Sounds good. Sounds good to me, man.
Shvit. All right.
Shvit.
This should be a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, we've had 6 weeks of pretty tough reading, so we deserve a break.
That's true. Yeah, hopefully this is fun. And the other fun thing is each of the chapters has a short foreword written by different people. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Cool,
yeah, we'll have to think in terms of. I'll have to start thinking what to do after that too.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I do really like the philosophy.
Yeah.
Sort of turn that we took.
Mm-hmm.
Although I again will say, I did define the podcast as a philosophy podcast from the outset. Just saying. But I do understand the difficulty in it. I mean, even I. Wow, that sounded arrogant, but I just say that because
I mean, you've read more of it than I have already.
Well, and I've been able to get through all the readings up to this point, but
nice.
This was one I had difficulty with just because.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it is long and arduous. So I have to think if because there's other philosophers I want to read, but I guess the point is I don't know if you'd be up for it. You don't care, I guess, either way.
Yeah, I'm good for it. You
just understand that you might not get through it.
And then I'll pick the Unabomber Manifesto next.
Okay.
No, I won't do that.
I don't care. Just I think the only one I would really not
what
want
would
to
be
do.
dangerous about what concerns me about that is I wouldn't want us to read it and like end up being like, oh, this is all great, because like I feel like there's a lot of disclaimer required for something like that.
Yeah.
It'd be like reading Mein Kampf and being like, dude, this is sweet.
I was just about to say, I think one of the few books that I would probably say I don't want to read is like that and maybe Mein Kampf.
What about Mein Kampf?
Mind Kampf?
No, mine.
Oh, your Kampf.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could just come out with a book called My Struggle, but in English, and
right.
just have it completely different. Like, just it'll be not related at all.
Right.
Let's just talk about butterflies and stuff. I don't know.
Right. Or call it Mein Kampf because it was your struggle in Germany. You had a bad time there, and you just completely
yeah.
oblivious.
It's like couldn't get a good espresso anywhere. It's ridiculous.
You're like, what? Is this already a thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right, cool. Well, all right.
Sweet.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll do those for next time.
Sounds good. All right.
Goodbye.
See ya.